Welcome to the Building Web3 Podcast. Today we're exploring the rise of Bitcoin DeFi with Robin from Liquidium. We'll learn about everything Bitcoin from DLCs and BRC20s to Ordinals and Runes, and how Liquidium is pioneering lending protocols on Bitcoin. Remember, nothing stated here is financial advice. Welcome to the Building Web3 Podcast. Today I have my good friend Robin. He is the co-founder of an exciting startup called Liquidium. Rob, before we get too deep into Liquidium, could you give us a brief background into what you were doing before you got to the Web3 space? What was your come to crypto moment?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me. So I guess my background is mostly in UI design and management. So that's kind of what I studied. And then obviously spent a lot of time like just creating websites and spending time in like Photoshop and learning all of this stuff. And I got into, I guess, like investments pretty quickly. So like when I turned 18, first thing I did, like on my birthday, I set up an exchange account and then kind of got into stocks and everything. But then quickly noticed that there's also something called Bitcoin. And Bitcoin was not only like a company, but really a technology. And it also happened to have like an investment instrument, which is Bitcoin, obviously. So it really sparked my interest. I learned more about crypto, more about Bitcoin, and kind of fascinated me that also like applications were built on the blockchain through like Ethereum and Solana and so on. So I wanted to see how, I guess, I can also contribute something to the space and build something in the space. So kind of knowing Bitcoin and the applications, it was kind of a conflict of interest because I really resonated with the idea of like Bitcoin being the most decentralized, the most secure currency in the world. And at the same time, Ethereum fascinated me for the programmability. So I didn't really know what to do, right? Like, what should I do now? Like building on Bitcoin, pretty much impossible. Building on Ethereum doesn't really address Bitcoin. So I started researching about like all kinds of cryptocurrencies, and then the thing that was closest to what I actually wanted to achieve was at that time Stacks, which is a side chain to Bitcoin. And Stacks is essentially like I guess nowadays you call it a layer 2. Back then it was called a side chain. Technically it's a side chain. Technically all Bitcoin layer 2s are side chains, I would say, except Lightning. But this kind of sparked my interest because it kind of like the idea behind it was to build on Bitcoin while also having smart contracts, so the programmability element. So I got into NFTs on Stacks, which is like a very, very niche thing. I think not a lot of people were into like Stacks NFTs. There was a small community around it. And then one thing that we noticed, like one need that was there is like, we had a marketplace, Gamma, which actually also pivoted to Bitcoin, and I think created even the first marketplace on Bitcoin for Ordinals. So we had an NFT marketplace, but we didn't have like more financial instruments or financial applications on Stacks. So at that time on Ethereum, NFT-fi just came out, and I guess the idea of NFTs is really like digital ownership on the blockchain, like verifiable by the blockchain. And if you look at like real world assets, what do people do with it? They really like, if you own property, and let's say you don't live in the property, you just own it, then maybe you rent it out. But most importantly, I think it is a really, really good form of collateral. And not only like property in the sense of like real estate, but also people use their stocks and like everything basically they own as collateral, or at least they can use it as collateral and then borrow against it. And like that's the entire bane of existence for banks, right? Like they give you loans for providing something as collateral that is more valuable. And so seeing like NFT-fi being built on Ethereum just made so much sense because you were just taking digital ownership as collateral and letting people borrow against it. Same thing with Aave, by the way. Aave is just like, Aave is for fungible tokens, NFT-fi was for non-fungible tokens, but in essence, I think the idea is the same, to use some sort of asset as collateral and borrow against it. And it makes a lot of sense on the blockchain because you are addressing a global market. You have verifiable outcomes. You have a verifiable piece of ownership or a verifiable asset. And that just makes a ton of sense. So I kind of wanted to bring this to Bitcoin. Back then, obviously, Ordinals did not exist. So we ended up building the first NFT lending protocol on Stacks. The way we did it, or the way we approached it with I guess, not that much background knowledge at that time, and also me not having a strong technical co-founder at that time, I applied for the Bitcoin Startup Lab, which is like a accelerator or incubator, whatever you want to call it. And in this program, I kind of learned about the basics of startups, building startups. And I also got to meet Pete, who is now our CTO and co-founder. I joined the startup lab with my other co-founder and CMO, Jay. And then the three of us basically built the first iteration of Liquidium on Stacks. This was in December, or like our work launched in December of 2022. And as most of the people know, Ordinals, so basically the NFTs of Bitcoin, of true Bitcoin, of layer one Bitcoin, the white paper was published in January of 2023, so like a month later. And I think we were one of the first ones to kind of see Ordinals happening on Bitcoin, obviously because the stack space was very close to Bitcoin. I think on February 7th, I sent a message to the Gamma team, the marketplace that I spoke about earlier, and I told them, hey, have you seen Ordinals? Have you looked into this? We're considering to build Liquidium for Ordinals now. So they actually also jumped on the bandwagon there. A lot of companies from the stack space went over to Ordinals. Xverse, I think, is a very known company there, like one of the, or probably the leading Bitcoin wallet right now. They came from Stacks. Gamma came from Stacks. Obviously, we came from Stacks and a bunch of other companies in the space. And so we suddenly had this new technology, this new Bitcoin asset called Ordinals. And we were like, damn, we just spent so much time building a lending protocol on Stacks, and like building on layer one Bitcoin is so different. But now we do have NFTs, or we do have alternative assets on Bitcoin. So this is actually what the original idea was. So then we kind of decided to pivot, go all in on layer one Bitcoin and build Liquidium the way it is now. So as a layer one borrowing and lending protocol on layer one Bitcoin, using kind of all kinds of fancy Bitcoin technologies that are accessible on Bitcoin right now. And I think we can dive into this a little bit deeper on, like, I guess, what challenges this brought, not having smart contracts on Bitcoin, and how we actually pulled it off from a technical perspective. But I think this is kind of the journey of how we got here.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the technical aspects and how those presented challenges. I remember one of our past guests said that building on Bitcoin is about 50x harder. So I don't know if you agree with that sentiment, but talk to us a little bit about the challenges, how you guys overcame them, like what kind of technologies are crucial.
Yeah, 100%. So I think the most crucial technology on Bitcoin, and it's a blessing that we had most of the Bitcoin technologies already before Ordinals came. One of the most crucial ones is called a PSBT, a partially signed Bitcoin transaction. And PSBTs are essentially, like, as the name suggests, a partially signed Bitcoin transaction. So for example, let's say you have some Bitcoin, or like you have an ordinal, I have some Bitcoin, and I want the ordinal and you want some Bitcoin for it. This is the classic marketplace example, right? You want to sell your ordinal, you want Bitcoin for it. I have Bitcoin, I want the ordinal, I want to send you Bitcoin for it. So now I can essentially create a transaction saying you send me 1 Bitcoin, I send you Ordinal, or vice versa. And now I can post this transaction, but I only sign one part of it. And in order for the transaction to execute, you need to sign the other half of it. So that is essentially how ordinal marketplaces are working. People that are listing their ordinals, they are saying, I'm creating a PSBT, I'm creating a partially signed Bitcoin transaction that says that I'm going to send an ordinal and somebody else is going to send me Bitcoin, and whoever signs the second part of this PSBT is going to be the one that is sending me Bitcoin. So now it kind of like, once 2 signatures are broadcasted and the conditions are fulfilled, the transaction happens. A cool thing about PSBTs is actually that it doesn't cost anything and it is instant to broadcast a PSBT. Obviously, the final transaction needs a Bitcoin fee and needs to settle on the blockchain, so that takes quite a bit of time. But the initial signing element is quite fast and feeless, which actually contributes to, I would say, probably even a better user experience than Ethereum marketplaces, because you don't have to pay for listings. You don't have to wait for listings. But yeah, so that's one part of it. The PSBTs, that's what pretty much everything, like every ordinal application uses these days. And then for us as a lending protocol, you have an additional element of technology that you need to use. Because in our case, it's not that simple that we just say you transfer, I transfer, and boom, the transfer happens. But instead, we have a loan. So we need to have a bunch of different parameters. Like, for example, we have to set like a loan duration. We have to define how much interest are we going to pay. What happens if the loan is repaid? What happens if the loan is not repaid? We need some sort of escrow to escrow the collateral. So it's a little bit more complex than just like a immediate transaction. And even constructing PSBTs is quite hard because you have to like manage the right UTXOs and everything. I could, I guess, talk about these challenges for hours, but in our case, what we needed is some sort of escrow or some sort of like, I guess, a very, very basic smart contract. And this is where a technology called Discrete Log Contracts, or in short, DLCs, come in. So a DLC is essentially a non-custodial multi-sig Bitcoin wallet that can receive, hold, and send funds. But the difference to like a regular multi-sig is that it has something called predetermined outcomes. So essentially, if you create a DLC, you can define where the DLC can send the funds afterwards. So in the case of a loan, and we are doing peer-to-peer loans on Bitcoin, you have one lender and one borrower. They are basically agreeing on some loan terms. And then once they start the loan, they both sign a PSBT. And then the PSBT essentially sends the collateral, in this case, an ordinal or a rune or something like that, to a DLC. And the DLC has the borrower's address and the lender's address as potential outcomes. And then also in this PSBT, basically the funds of the loan amount is transferred from the lender to the borrower. By the way, if I'm referring to borrower and lender, just to define these terms, a borrower is, in our case, the one who is borrowing Bitcoin against their asset. And then the lender is the one who is lending out their Bitcoin in order to earn a yield on their Bitcoin. So these are kind of the two parties involved. And this DLC now has the function of escrowing the collateral during the loan. And then in our case, every loan has a loan expiration. So it is very simple. The only condition that we're looking at essentially is the loan repaid on time or not? So if the borrower repays the loan on time, And then basically on the blockchain, we can see that the borrower sent the exact repayment amount to the lender. If that's the case, then Oracle goes ahead and says, check, loan was repaid on time. Now basically we can send the collateral back to the borrower. Also, the borrower in the repayment transaction signs also part of the transaction. So now you have kind of the multi-sig between the Oracle and the borrower saying, hey, there was a loan repayment, send the funds back to the borrower. Or if the borrower does not repay and the loan expires, then the Oracle says, hey, I have never registered a repayment. The time lock of the DLC runs out and basically says, cool, there was no repayment. Now the collateral is free to be claimed by the lender. But again, the beauty of the DLC is that only the borrower or the lender can kind of claim the collateral from the DLC. So even like the beautiful thing about a smart contract is that it, in many cases, makes such a scenario trustless. And a DLC kind of fulfills the same thing. It's just a way less dumbed down version of a smart contract, I would say. But it creates kind of this non-custodial element where even we as a platform, we could not steal any user funds even if we wanted to. Obviously, we don't want to, but we could. So it kind of makes it trust minimized and non-custodial in a way. But yeah, talking about the challenges here is obviously this tech is so different from smart contracts. And there are so few people that understand Bitcoin really well. And even getting to a point where we kind of discovered all of these technologies that we can use was a huge pain because there is no YouTube tutorial on how to create a smart contract on Bitcoin. There wasn't anything like that. We just basically had to go through all kind of Bitcoin technologies that are out there and really do the research and see which ones we can use in order to pull off what we wanted to do. And then also a PSBT, a DLC, and so on are way more limited in terms of programmability compared to a smart contract. So you always have like a lot of limitations on Bitcoin, and you have to find very creative ways to get around them. So yeah, I guess there are always compromises to Bitcoin, but at the same time, I think that's what makes it very interesting. I like the challenge that it poses because you have to get really creative about it, and you have to think about like if you want to create an application on Bitcoin, you have to break it down to the core function. So what is the most essential piece of the application? What should it get done? And then kind of you focus on the core functionality versus making it super fancy and potentially even introducing more risks by making it extremely fancy. So yeah, I think so that is in a nutshell what technologies we're using, and obviously kind of where we are constantly hitting limitations with Bitcoin is we don't have smart contracts. We have to find the technologies that make anything possible on Bitcoin. And basically every day is a new challenge because we want to build new features, and we kind of need to innovate in how we can actually get around the limitations of Bitcoin and pull the things off that we're envisioning.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the Bitcoin renaissance, as I'll call it, over the past 2 years. So you had, BRC20s come out, you had Ordinals, you had runes. Can we just define some of these? Ordinals, we already defined it earlier as being like the NFTs of the Bitcoin world. And then you guys are kind of working in, what would we call this? The BTC-fi space?
Yeah. No, I think, it's very interesting what happened on Bitcoin lately. Because Bitcoin was always this dinosaur that just had a currency that was used for value transfers or a piece of kind of just value that you kind of wanted to hold, and ideally it would go up in price. But it was very boring. Like there weren't many use cases of like actually using Bitcoin. Besides, I guess now Lightning in El Salvador, I think there are some like Bitcoin enthusiasts that really like spending Bitcoin there and paying in Lightning with their coffee. Paying their coffee with Lightning in Bitcoin. I actually did this. I spent 2 months this year in El Salvador, and that was quite fun to see that this is possible. But Ordinals were so the Ordinals protocol, as I like to view it, is it's almost like um, a library, like if you are like Bitcoin until the Ordinals protocol existed was just a huge mess. Like it was very, very difficult to track where individual Satoshis went. And everything like the only thing that the Ordinals protocol really did is it created an indexer to track exactly where every single Satoshi is. So kind of like routing every single transaction, every single UTXO that it did in history. So now we can perfectly pinpoint where the Satoshi is. So it's almost like somebody just took a huge mess of books, like that was always moving, and then thought like, hey, let's just put them in a library where we have where we see exactly, okay, here are categories, here they are sorted by like alphabetical order or something like that, and now we can easily pinpoint the data on Bitcoin. And then obviously with this idea, first of all, we had rare sets, which is like now we can track, for example, which Satoshi was mined, which Satoshi was mined by Satoshi Nakamoto himself, which Satoshi was used in the Silk Road marketplace, and so on. So that was quite fun. I guess just playing detective on the blockchain and seeing where the sets came from. But then obviously also the idea of assigning data to individual Satoshis. So saying, hey, we put an image on the Satoshi in the witness data of this UTXO. And since we can now track Satoshis, we can always perfectly pinpoint the image that is attached to this Satoshi. So that was Ordinals. And then Domo obviously went ahead and said like, hey, let's build an indexer on top of this indexer and inscribe some JSON files, which are now called BRC20, and essentially build a fungible token protocol on top of a non-fungible token protocol on top of Bitcoin, which is a fungible token protocol. This was, I think, the first time that Ordinals went beyond just NFT enthusiasts, but really hit like a mass market, because the narrative of having a fungible token on Bitcoin is just great. Like, you can think about BRC20 whatever you want. Yeah, it's clunky. Yes, it kind of is very messy. But it just did the job, and it was a fungible token on Bitcoin. It created new assets on Bitcoin. And obviously with all of these things, with these assets that we now have on Bitcoin, now it finally made sense to build applications on Bitcoin. Because previously, like, why would I need a DeFi protocol on Bitcoin if I only have Bitcoin? Would I swap Bitcoin for Bitcoin? Would I borrow Bitcoin against more Bitcoin? Or like, yeah, I mean, that would be a leverage play. You could do that. Yeah, I think having alternative assets is the first time where it actually makes a lot of sense to build DeFi applications, to build marketplaces, to build swaps, to build lending protocols. And yeah, this obviously, like, I would say Ordinals, like ever since Ordinals came, we probably have like 100 times as many developers on Bitcoin as before. I mean, this is just me kind of guessing, but I'm very sure that this number is somewhat accurate, or or it's even more. It is great because way more people learn about Bitcoin, really know the ins and outs and everything. But yeah, the point that I'm getting to is I think there was no need for applications to exist on Bitcoin until there were alternative assets. And now it makes a lot of sense. And now we're seeing a lot of developers coming. And I'm very glad that we were, I would say, like the first DeFi application on Bitcoin besides a marketplace. And so far it turned out to be a good bet. A lot of people are using it. A lot of people love using Bitcoin. And obviously also the wallets allow for this now. The marketplaces allow for this. And we are finally getting like the infrastructure ready. But Bitcoin DeFi and Bitcoin applications are still very much in its infancy.
Yeah, so let's talk real quickly about Runes to kind of describe what that was, where that innovation came from. And then let's talk a little bit about the adoption of these Bitcoin applications, specifically Liquidity.
Yeah. So Runes, I would say to some degree, they are a refined version of BRC-20. They use a very different technology. So BRC-20, as I described, they are basically, so you basically put like you use NFTs to say, I am minting some token, and now every time you transfer a token, you have to mint a new NFT that says, I am transferring, and then you have to transfer this NFT that says, I'm transferring, and then this NFT is invalid, and if somebody else wants to transfer again, they need to mint a new NFT, or in this case, inscribe a new ordinal or inscribe a new inscription saying, I want to transfer. So it's very clunky. It's very heavy on fees. It's slow. It always requires 2 transactions at least to transfer something. So Casey, the creator of Ordinals or of the Ordinals protocol, said, hey, obviously there is a need for fungible tokens on Bitcoin. So I have a better idea of how to do fungible tokens on Bitcoin. So he created the Runes protocol, which is now embedded into kind of the Ordinals protocol. And instead of using inscriptions to track the state of the fungible tokens, it uses UTXOs. So it purely uses UTXOs, and basically you have like an empty input. You put some data into a UTXO, and then you can transfer the runes in one transaction. And I think like for the average user, really the difference between Runes and BRC-20 is that Runes are cheaper. They are less intensive when it comes to bloat on Bitcoin, and they can be sent in one single transaction versus multiple transactions as with BRC-20.
Got it. So let's talk a little bit about the adoption of, Bitcoin apps and, Liquidium itself, because, many people like Bitcoin because they're like, it's safe and secure. And talk a little bit about like how people in the ecosystem are viewing these and are they using them?
Yeah. So as I said, like we're still very much in the infancy of Bitcoin applications. Also, of course, first of all, because of the constraints of just Bitcoin itself, you don't have smart contracts. Second of all, because of the lack of Bitcoin developers. So it turns out to be extremely difficult to program Bitcoin. And it turns out to be almost as difficult to find a Bitcoin developer. So I think that a lot of companies are just struggling with finding the right talent in the Bitcoin ecosystem because it also is so new, like the development piece on Bitcoin. And therefore, everything is just moving a little bit slower at the moment versus like other chains. And then also, you don't really have like these guidelines in space, like in place. Like for example, with Ethereum, you just use a smart contract. On Bitcoin, you always have to find a way how you can pull something off. So in our case, it is a mix between PSBTs and DLCs. But for example, now if you want to do swaps, a DLC doesn't really work because you can't, like, with a swap, you need a liquidity pool, and then anybody can buy or sell from and to the liquidity pool. So you can't have something like predetermined outcomes. A PSBT works, but then the question is always like, where does the liquidity pool live? Is it like a custodial wallet and so on? I think now we're getting to a point where people are more open to the idea of not having smart contracts, because a lot of companies are now exploring around, or not that many, but some companies are starting to play around with multi-sigs. So essentially, instead of saying, hey, we have a smart contract, we're saying we are creating just a simple Bitcoin multi-sig that can take custody of the funds, and then multiple people have a signature in the multi-sig. So instead of saying we're building a smart contract that is decentralized, we're saying we're building a multi-sig that is decentralized, and we just have like multiple parties running this multi-sig, ideally even some trusted companies like MPC providers like BitGo, and so on. So I think that this is kind of a new approach, and it seems like people are very open to this idea. I think one great example is DotSwap. They are probably the first to do like Bitcoin swaps similar to what Uniswap has on Ethereum. So really just like not kind of the clunky marketplace experience, but instead really a swap, which is extremely cool to see. Obviously, there is an argument to be made that it's not as decentralized as like a proper smart contract yet. But I think this is something like decentralization can definitely happen with these sort of multi-sigs. So I think there is a lot of creative energy in the space right now. We're also like exploring with new technologies and also with decentralized multi-sigs and so on every day. And I think we kind of have to let loose of some of the best practices that we have on other blockchains and be more creative about it and see how things can be solved on Bitcoin.
Absolutely. So let's talk about some of the opportunities that are on Liquidium. So if someone's never, logged in or seen what you guys are building, let's talk about the life of a transaction. Let's say, let's go through the borrower life of a transaction and the lender life of a transaction. So like how it works, they log into Liquidium, they put up their funds.
Yeah. Great question. So I will just start with the ordinal lending, because that was our first product, and that's still, I guess, our main product. Although I guess in transaction volume or in the amount of transactions, Runes are actually doing more transactions now on Liquidium. But I'll just start with ordinal lending. So as I explained before, we kind of have two users. One user is the borrower, somebody who has an ordinal, somebody who has this Bitcoin NFT, who wants to keep their ordinal ideally, and but at the same time they need liquidity. So that's the one user, and then the other user is a lender, so somebody who has a ton of Bitcoin and who just wants to put their Bitcoin to work to earn some yield on their Bitcoin. So now what the lender can do on Liquidium, and this is kind of the first step, the lender creates a loan offer on a collection. So let's say, for example, one very popular collection is Bitcoin Puppets. And let's just assume that the floor price of Bitcoin Puppets is currently sitting at 1 Bitcoin. That's obviously not accurate, but let's just take it for the sake of simplicity. So now you have like the ordinal collection, Bitcoin Puppets, and the floor price. So I guess the value that we can use is 1 Bitcoin. So now the lender says, okay, cool. I really like Bitcoin Puppets. I wouldn't mind owning a Bitcoin Puppet, so I'm willing to take a Bitcoin Puppet as collateral. So now the lender can go ahead and create a loan offer on the Bitcoin Puppets collection and can essentially say, I'm willing to lend out 0.8 Bitcoin, for example, to Bitcoin puppets. So 80% of the value. And then if somebody has a Bitcoin puppet, then they can go ahead and say, cool, there is an offer for 0.8 Bitcoin. I'll take it, borrow, they sign a signature, lender signs a signature, boom, the loan starts. So that's kind of how it is. Like, and then obviously also in the loan offer, you kind of have defined like the duration and the interest rate. But yeah, it's pretty much that simple. You have one lender, one borrower per each loan, and the lenders are creating collection offers or like loan offers on collections, and then the borrowers can, if they have a piece of this collection, then they can take these loan offers. And also a cool thing about this method of doing the loan flow is that lenders are essentially outcompeting or like outbidding each other all the time. So, for example, maybe you say you're willing to lend 0.8 Bitcoin on Bitcoin puppets, and then I'm saying I'm willing to lend 0.81 Bitcoin, and then somebody else is saying I'm even willing to lend more. So that's quite cool because you have like a very streamlined offer book where the lenders are constantly making better and better loan offers, which really helps the borrower to just get the best terms as possible. They just get the maximum Bitcoin that somebody is willing to put up. So yeah, that's the flow, how it works with Ordinals. And then for runes right now, the flow is actually very similar. So we have, let's say, dog go to the moon as a rune. In our case, the way we do it right now is we have like different bundle sizes of dog. So for example, there is one bundle size of 100 dog, one bundle size of 1,000 dog, one bundle size of 10,000 dog. And then same thing, for example, you have a Bitcoin. You're saying I'm willing to give 0.8 Bitcoin to 10,000 dog. And then somebody else can do a better offer and so on. But I guess here we see the limitation of Bitcoin again and kind of the clunky user experience to some degree, because we have to do the bundle sizes. We cannot just create this Aave experience right now. Speaking of which, we're working on a solution for that. So while we currently only have peer-to-peer loans for runes, and it's working really well, like taking the limitations of Bitcoin into consideration, it's working really well. However, we don't want to settle here, and we believe that we can build pretty DeFi applications that match the likes of Ethereum and Solana. We're currently on our path to build kind of the Aave of Bitcoin, where you can borrow stable coins against your Bitcoin, like native Bitcoin. You can borrow any rune against any rune. You can borrow BRC20 against runes and vice versa and so on. Really go wild with it. And that is kind of our North Star, to build this whole lending infrastructure on Bitcoin and bring the space forward.
Yeah, so it seems like you touched on quite a few of the topics, but any particular milestones or developments people can look forward to from you guys, like should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, so as I said, like the North Star for us is the Aave on Bitcoin that we're building. Besides that, we also just launched our token, and the Liquidium token is the first governance token on Bitcoin. So I think we have like a lot of firsts, being one of the earliest companies in the space. And so our goal here with this token is to decentralize the protocol as much as possible, to really give the community ownership, to let the community kind of steer where Liquidium is going to be, and kind of make Liquidium even more indestructible. So that's something that we're focused on, because we just launched our token on Monday last week. So that's quite a recent event. And then on top of that, we're also exploring ways to have instant ordinal loans. So right now, as a borrower, you still have to wait a couple minutes for the lender to countersign your loan. we also want to automate this flow where you really have like a one-click borrowing experience as a borrower. And just, I guess, lots of refinements to bring Bitcoin DeFi to the same or even a superior user experience than other protocols on other chains.
Perfect. And let's talk a little bit about, any kind of notable partnerships you guys have, any collaborations you guys have formed on your way.
Yeah, sure. So obviously I'm thankful for all of the great connections that we were able to make in the space throughout the last 1.5 years. Some of them being Magic Eden. We have done some campaigns with them together, obviously integrated their wallet and just trying to kind of push the space forward together. They are the number one Ordinals marketplace at the moment. We're the number one Ordinals lending protocol in the space. So it kind of like there is some natural synergy. Xverse is, in my opinion, the best wallet at the moment. And we have been working with them forever to make sure that we have kind of the perfect integration, that everything is running smoothly. Also some plans for like native integrations into the wallets, which I'm very excited about. So you don't even have to leave your wallet ideally in order to perform your DeFi executions. So these, I guess, are some of the partnerships that we have currently going on, and we're very proud to have some of these leading Bitcoin companies working with us.
Awesome. So I'm sure everyone now is really excited to, start learning more about Liquidium and get involved in BTC-fi. Can you talk about where can people learn more about you guys? Keep in touch with the exciting developments you guys have going on.
Yeah, I think the easiest, first overview is on liquidium.fi, our website. So we have liquidium.fi where you get like the overview of Liquidium, and then app.liquidium.fi is our application itself. And then on top of that, we obviously have Twitter and Discord. I think Discord is like, if you're using the product and you want to interact with other users, Discord is probably your best place to be. Liquidium.link/Discord. And then our Twitter is our X is x.com/liquidium.fi. So these are probably the best spaces to learn about us right now. And we're always trying to, I guess, push all of the major announcements there and keep the people in the loop.
Awesome. Well, everyone get involved with Robin. Go interact with Liquidium. Start, putting some money where we all learn about. So finally, thank you so much, Robin, for coming on here. And everyone, let's go get involved and continue to build the future of Web3 together.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. I'm excited about it. And I'm obviously encouraging everybody who is interested in the Bitcoin space to also try to start building some applications, try to get the creative juices flowing. And if we can help with anything, obviously feel free to reach out to me. But thanks so much for having me.